Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Invisible College, What a Group of Scientists Has Discovered About UFO Influences on the Human Race, by Jacques Vallee, narrated by Michael Butler Murray. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Forward to the 2014 edition. When it was first published in New York, 40 years ago, this book raised a number of new questions, never seriously considered before in paranormal research. It attempted to build a bridge between two fields that were growing in ignorance of each other, namely, the investigation of psychic functioning and the study of unidentified aerial phenomena. At the time, most advocates of the reality of UFOs were convinced that the objects were spacecraft from other planets, and that public opinion would, soon, force governments to recognize this fact. Many proponents of ufology still feel the same way today. For the small group of scientists who were actively investigating cases, interviewing witnesses, and exchanging data through a small informal network of international contacts, the phenomenon did not seem to fall so simply into comfortable patterns. At Northwestern University, the team around Professor J. Allen Hynek, of which I was a part, had access to the files of the U.S. Air Force project Blue Book. They were augmented by the collections of sighting data I had brought from Europe when I emigrated from France in 1962. These files did support the notion that UFOs were physical objects with all the characteristics of an advanced technology. But they also posed some intriguing challenges of a different kind. Witnesses described an alteration of consciousness in the presence of the phenomenon, and even some unexplained physiological effects. Soon, a small cadre of dedicated researchers, men like Fred Beckman at the University of Chicago, William T. Powers at Northwestern, Douglas Price Williams at UCLA, Ted Phillips in Missouri, and half a dozen others, began exchanging data and analyses on a regular basis. They were joined by distinguished French researchers in philosopher Aimé Michel's circle, like planetary astronomer Pierre Guérin, Sorbonne biologist and parapsychologist Rémy Chauvin, and relativist Olivier Costa de Beauregard, along with aerospace expert Dr. Claude Poer at Kness. With his keen sense of scientific history and his usual humor, Dr. Hynek called this informal network the Invisible College, in reference to the secretive group of natural philosophers who fought against the established dogmas of the Church in the mid-17th century to acquire knowledge through experimental investigation. Inspired by early Rosicrucian ideas, they became the nucleus for the Royal Society, the first modern scientific body. In later years, the movement started by this group became integrated in a larger multi-nation volunteer research effort, joined by many individuals. Many new facts have accumulated beyond those cited in this book, but the questions we had raised have remained current. What is the nature of unidentified aerial phenomena? If they are not simply visitors from the cosmos, what are the implications for our view of reality and for the search for extraterrestrial civilizations? What basic scientific issues do the observations call into question? Most urgently, what are the changes that will be necessary in the structure of modern science in order to allow progress in the rational study of such observations? And is there an undiscovered bridge between human consciousness and higher physical dimensions? Because these questions are as open today as they were in 1975, we have decided to reprint this book and to place these burning issues before a new generation of interested listeners. Jacques F. Vallee, San Francisco, July 2014. Introduction. In the last 25 years, thousands of people have reported the persistent appearances of UFO phenomena. A careful examination of the patterns of these reports has already shown that they follow definite laws for which no explanation has been found. These statistical facts have been adequately documented elsewhere and will not concern us here. Instead, we will examine a more exciting subject: the role of this phenomenon and its impact on each of us. The aim of this book is to offer a new point of view on UFOs. It has become important to pose the UFO problem in a new fashion because our cultural beliefs regarding the existence of forms of consciousness elsewhere in the universe are undergoing major shifts. Perhaps these shifts have been precipitated by the realization that outer space has been opened to man, and by the feeling of the smallness and the isolation of our planet brought back by astronauts. Perhaps they are flowing from the hope that other civilizations may already have solved the economic and social problems that concern every country on Earth today. The scope and impact of this cultural change have received some attention, but no attempt has yet been made to understand its basic mechanism. In this book, I propose to examine the hypothesis that UFOs may constitute a control system, that they are not necessarily caused by extraterrestrial visitors, nor the result of misidentifications and hoaxes on the part of deluded witnesses. If the hypothesis is true, then what the witnesses have seen were manifestations of a process not unlike that of a thermostat in a house. The thermostat is a mechanism that stabilizes the relationship between our body temperature requirements and the changing weather outside. Similarly, UFOs may serve to stabilize the relationship between man's consciousness needs and the evolving complexities of the world which he must understand. This book will explore this phenomenon. Among those of my scientific colleagues who have taken an interest in UFOs, there have been two major approaches, which might be termed technological and psychological. Several physicists and engineers have examined UFO reports from a nuts and bolts point of view. On the other hand, the same UFO reports have been interpreted by psychologists as archetypes, or as the fulfillment of a psychological need of the percipient. Modern science developed on the premise that these two domains of the physical and the psychological must always be carefully separated. In my view, this distinction, although convenient, has been arbitrary. The UFO phenomenon is a direct challenge to this arbitrary dichotomy between physical reality and spiritual reality. In this book, I will not confine myself to the examination of the physical reality, but will frankly step from this to the experiential and even to the mythical. I will approach this inquiry within the framework of descriptive phenomenology, which social scientist Cynthia Nelson has defined as follows. Descriptive phenomenology attempts to communicate the quality and structure of experiences, be they clear and symbolically defined or diffuse, and even not symbolized. Its subject matter is any concrete phenomenon in experience. Instead of asking, like the physicist, does the phenomenon interact with measurable quantities of its environment? Or, like the psychologist, what mental impulses or behavioral needs does the report fulfill? We will review what is experienced by the witnesses. We will observe what they do as a result of these experiences, and we will attempt to correlate them within a total framework. In 1968, during the months following the Six-Day War, many people claimed to have witnessed apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Zaytun, Egypt. Cynthia Nelson was led to ask the question of the meaning of that reality in a way that is directly applicable to our study of UFOs. As phenomenologists, we suspend judgment as to whether the apparition is really real, a question for scientific naturalism, and attempt rather to understand what people do when confronting stress. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. In this sense, the UFO phenomenon is undoubtedly real. What does it mean, then, to say that it may represent a control system? And what is the quantity that is being controlled? I will try to show that what takes place through close encounters with UFOs is control of human beliefs, control of the relationship between our consciousness and physical reality, that this control has been in force throughout history, and that it is of secondary importance that it should now assume the form of sightings of space visitors. When the object we call UFO is visible to us in the reality of everyday life, I think that it constitutes both a physical entity with mass, inertia, volume, etc., which we can measure, and a window toward another mode of reality for at least some of the percipients. Is this why witnesses can give us at the same time a consistent narrative? At 1:35 I was driving on Highway 58, and a description of contact with forms of life that fit no acceptable framework? These forms of life may be similar to projections. They may be real, yet a product of our dreams. Like our dreams, we can look into their hidden meaning, or we can ignore them. But like our dreams, they may also shape what we think of as our lives in ways that we do not yet understand. I might as well confess at the outset that I have seen phenomena I can only call UFOs. I have not only seen them, but on 2 occasions in the course of my professional work have tracked them using small telescopes called theodolites. A few of my astronomer colleagues had made similar observations, and after making inquiries, we became aware of many similar sightings by professional astronomers the world over. The objects we were tracking were not spectacular, but the reaction they elicited among French scientists at the time fascinated me. Instead of asking if these seemingly maneuverable and impossible objects could be a manifestation of some advanced technology, and in some cases, it may well have been terrestrial, they thought only of suppressing their manifestation. They did this by denying every observation, by blaming it on airplanes when the documentation was unassailable, and by destroying the data when it was demonstrated to them that no airplane could have behaved as the objects did. The insight I derived from this early experience with no scientific skepticism proved invaluable. It brought me into contact with a number of scientists who, like myself, wanted to understand the nature of the UFO phenomenon and were especially bent upon determining whether or not it had an intelligent origin. This group has grown larger over the years. Whimsically, it calls itself the Invisible College. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, in an article called The UFO Mystery, published in the FBI Bulletin, Volume 44, Number 2, February 1975, has said, "Way back in the dark ages of science, when scientists themselves were suspected of being in league with the devil, they had to work privately. They often met clandestinely to exchange views and the results of their various experiments. For this reason, they called themselves the Invisible College, and it remained invisible until the scientists of that day gained respectability when the Royal Society was chartered by Charles II in the early 1660s. My interest in UFOs has gone through several phases during this period, but my curiosity about the behavior of scientists who destroy, distort, or simply ignore the very facts they are supposed to investigate has never been satisfied. Scientists are not the only ones to blame for the unfortunate stigma that is still attached to the subject of UFOs, but such a gap has appeared between their official beliefs and the beliefs of millions of people that a re-examination of the entire problem is now necessary. We have, on one hand, the facts, thousands of unexplained observations by reliable witnesses. They stand as a monument to the limitations of our understanding. I will not enumerate these cases again. The curious listener will find them in such accessible places as the works of J. Allen Hynek, of Aimé Michel, John Fuller, and others. One of my earlier books, Passport to Magonia, contains a catalog of 923 unexplained UFO landings, and the size of this evidence is increasing daily. We have, on the other hand, a paucity of theories to account for this richness of data. Either this must be invention, delusion, hoax, and mirages, the experts tell us, or else we are being visited by an extraterrestrial race. I cannot subscribe to either explanation. I have argued for many years that the phenomenon could not be explained by hoax and illusion alone, that it contains an opportunity for genuinely new knowledge. In this book, I hope to show why these unexplained observations need not represent a visitation from space visitors. Much of my motivation for examining critically the extraterrestrial theory has come from a study of the information of witness accounts, which I processed on a computer using modern techniques of analysis. Many of these accounts describe the occupants of the craft. This material is rich enough for us to form a good idea of these beings' physiology and behavior, if it in fact corresponded to the conditions of biological evolution we can assume on other planets. What we obtain instead is a picture of a different level of existence, a reality that seems to cut through our own at right angles. It is what I call the reality of Magonia. But there is more. No theory of UFOs can be deemed acceptable if it does not account for the reported psychic effects produced by these objects. By psychic effects, I refer to the space-time distortions experienced by percipients of craft-like devices, which appear or fade away on the spot in ways that are reminiscent of descriptions of materializations in the spiritualist literature. The data also show that many witnesses have had unique experiences with apparently alien voices or thoughts in connection with the sightings. But I am especially referring to the fact that certain witnesses have been changed in a manner that is not explained by the events they claim to have observed. The best way to illustrate the complexity of these psychic effects is to examine two examples that are particularly instructive. In October 1973, I met a man who wanted to discuss with me what he called his mission. He was a neatly dressed engineer executive who wore a dark suit and thick glasses. He stressed the importance of preserving his anonymity. He had experienced a great change in his life, he said, as a result of which he had come to the United States, where he was now working with an electronic company. The change in his life had occurred when he had been taken aboard a flying saucer and had been taught certain things. Contrary to most contactees, however, he sought no publicity, had no message to deliver to humanity, and did not claim to understand what had happened to him. He only knew that he was no longer the same person. At the time of this encounter, I had been for over a year in touch with another man, whose story was similar but on the veracity of which I had reserved judgment. This other man was Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic who began an entertainment career as a stage magician, but later puzzled the scientists who tested his abilities in the laboratory. Like the engineer, Geller had been inside what he described as a UFO. Like him, he had experienced a major life change and left his country. Like him, he felt that he had been given a mission, and that he was the center of peculiar physical effects. So when I met the engineer, instead of brushing aside the entire story, as I might have done before my acquaintance with Geller, I spent several hours listening to him with an open mind, trying to understand his experiences and his motivations. This series of events had begun in July 1961, when the engineer, who was then a student, was walking through the countryside with 4 other men during an archaeological field trip. At some point, he found himself separated from the group, wandered behind a cluster of trees, where suddenly he saw an object on the ground. It was a disc-shaped vehicle, about 20 feet wide, with a translucent elevator that lifted him to a cabin. As in a dream or a movie, the vehicle transported him into a desolate area far away from this spot and landed near a large machine reminiscent of a computer, about 5 feet high and 20 feet long, with row after row of recordings. It was not a teaching machine of any known earthly type. During the 3 hours he spent with the device, his impression was that it kept playing these recordings and feeding their contents directly into his brain. After this session, he flew back alone. 18 days had elapsed as far as his friends and family were concerned. His father, a government official, had caused several police and military units to look for him. He was found within feet of the spot where he had last been seen. He still wore the same flower at his buttonhole. His clothes were impeccable. He did not need a shave. The story was unbelievable, as the witness himself soon realized. To satisfy the unwanted curiosity of the numerous people who bothered his family, he confessed that it had been a joke. This explanation had the desired effect, and the case was gradually forgotten. In the meantime, this man's life was changing in several ways. For example, for the first 6 months after the incident, he required an abnormal amount of sleep. He would fall asleep about 6 in the evening and not wake up until 7 in the morning. Then the pattern changed, and he required less and less sleep. Now he says that he requires only a few hours of sleep each night, and also, in the university courses he attended, everything that was taught now came to him with perfect clarity and total recall. Moreover, he stopped dreaming, or recalling his dreams. Finally, he states that he has not experienced sickness in any form since the incident. This man's experiences following the UFO encounter are very similar to those of a number of individuals, only a few of whom attempt to publicize their observations. Uri Geller is an example of one UFO percipient who developed some rather extraordinary beliefs about himself and about the future as a result of what he describes as an encounter with a flying saucer. An American parapsychologist, Dr. Andrea Puharich, brought Geller to the United States in 1971 and arranged for the young man to be studied under laboratory conditions at several scientific institutions. Geller's abilities include what can best be described as the triggering of a force which affects material objects, and which sometimes even seems to lead to dematerializations. Many of the manifestations around him are similar to classical poltergeist phenomena, as described in the folklore of many countries. Mysterious breakage and disappearance of objects, usually ascribed to the imagination of the witnesses. The puzzling fact here is that some phenomena affecting mass and inertia appear to be reproducible in the laboratory. Most remarkable of our purpose, however, is the fact that Geller believes himself invested with a mission, given to him by a mysterious space source. Some of his followers even suggest that he might be a messiah. The engineer whose experiences I am summarizing here has developed along lines similar to Geller, although his psychological makeup is considerably different. He is withdrawn and secretive, while Geller is a showman. The engineer is a very quiet and well-organized man, whose greatest wish is to remain unknown. He feels that he has received certain information from the teaching machine, that he has acquired the ability to leave his body, that he is now able to transfer his consciousness at will into other objects or into space, and that he can trigger a psychokinetic power similar to that of Geller, who claims that he bends or breaks objects by pure thought. The most directly verifiable consequence of this incident in the engineer's life has been his departure from his country to pursue his mission in the United States, more specifically in California. Here, he states, some major changes will take place, although he feels they will be social and political in nature he does not claim to have been given any particular message to announce to the world. The entire story is absurd, yet disturbing. Absurd, too, is the change in his eyesight caused by the experience. Prior to his alleged abduction, this man had perfect eyesight in both eyes. It deteriorated rapidly afterward, a fact he attributes to a blinding, blinking light that was situated on top of the machine. Some sort of vibration generated pain under the ear at the base of the skull throughout the experience. And a last absurd detail is this one. The witness states that he saw a vehicle and a machine, but he did not see a pilot, nor an occupant, nor any identifiable form of intelligent life in connection with these devices. The common denominator in these two stories is the feeling of absurdity caused by the superimposition of psychic effects, psychokinesis, telepathy, travel to a different space-time frame, to the array of physical descriptions that have come to characterize the UFO phenomenon in general. Both these men claim to have observed a craft, to have entered it, and to have received information from visible and tangible devices. It is by concentrating upon the nature of this apparent absurdity that we can start looking for a general framework within which these experiences can find an interpretation. 4 major elements have combined in the last few years to shape a new framework for the study of UFO reports, a framework I will refer to in Chapter 5 as the Hilltop Theory. These 4 elements that forced a revision of previous ideas about UFOs, such as the mass psychosis idea and the space visitors idea, are 1. The psychic component present in the apparent space and time alterations and in the information transfer reported by the percipients. 2. The nature of personal, social, and governmental reaction to the phenomenon, which can be described as triple cover-up. 3. The observation of patterns of belief, akin to a new religious or mystical movement, among those who claim to be in contact with non-human intelligences. And 4. The sophisticated groups which are already exploiting these patterns, such as the UMO organization in Spain. A chapter will be devoted to each one of the elements. The new framework opens areas of investigation which have not until now been tied to the analysis of the total phenomenon, notably the investigation of the religious experience and the so-called miracles, which we will introduce in Chapter 6, and the reports of psychic phenomena, such as those exhibited by Geller. These are the points on which we will build a concept of the purpose of the technology that produces the modern signs in the sky, a technology that can assume many more surprising forms than it has so far shown. Every human activity has a secret side. Science does not escape this rule. Beyond the dry, humorless reporting of experiments in the pages of technical magazines, there is the reality of research as it is lived by many men and women. Much of their existence is spent gathering data and observing facts. Not all the data they gather see the light of day. Not all the facts they observe become public knowledge. As the century of science draws to an end, more and more of the material that researchers discover fails to be published, because it fits into no convenient pre-existing framework. In particular, the UFO phenomenon is still largely ignored by science, although it has been a subject of persistent mystery for the last 25 years. There is one haunting thought underlying the UFO phenomenon. Something mysterious seems to be manifested in our environment. The things have been seen by thousands of people in all countries. They have been tracked on military radar, and they have been photographed by astronauts, leading many to the belief that they originated in outer space. They have been filmed by rocket-borne cameras and touched by farmers. They have been adored by simple people, denied by scientists, prayed to by the devout, cursed by primitives, and celebrated by poets. They have been called flying saucer, unidentified flying objects.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?